Okay, guys, we'll get started. So today we're talking about conditionals and loops, but before that, we have a couple of announcements. So homework 2 is due tonight. If you haven't started it, please start it. But we always have a three-week grace period. So if you join late or you didn't have time, you can always submit it within 3 weeks. Homework 3 has been released and it's due in 2 weeks. So not the usual 1 week because this is your first Python homework and it's also covering 2 weeks worth of content. So you have 2 weeks to work on it, but we highly recommend you guys get started on it right now because it is the first Python homework. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So let's first talk about conditionals. They're basically if-else statements. So if some condition is true, you want Python to do something, and if it's not true, you want to do something else. So I have the structure up here. So you say if, and then you have your condition, and then you put a colon. Don't forget that colon. And then if that condition is true, you want to do something. And you have else, you do something else. You don't always need your else case, but you'll always need the if case. Otherwise, it's not an if statement. So can anyone tell me any possible conditions you can think of? So like anything that you might want to put in an if statement. And there are no wrong answers. Yeah. Yeah. So in your if statements, it's always going to be a Boolean statement in there as your condition. Are there any other ideas? Can be like a specific condition too. Yeah. 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 Great idea. That's actually what I put in the next slide. So you can check like if a number is even, if a number is odd, if it's divisible by some number, if the length of a string is a certain number, length of a list even. Like there are a lot of things you can put in there. It just depends on the context of the problem. So as an example, I checked if the number is even. So if, let's say x is defined somewhere else, if x mod 2, so if the remainder of x divided by 2 is equal to 0, then I print x is even, and else, so if it's not even, you print x is odd. Okay, so let's try coding this together. So we want to check, we want to compare x with 10. If x is greater than 10, we're going to output x is greater than 10. If it's equal to 10, we'll output x is equal to 10. And otherwise, we'll say x is less than 10. So let's open VS Code. Let me get rid of this.
If anyone has issues opening VS Code still, please call me over or Megan.
Okay. So we're going to compare some number x with 10. So we're going to say if. So what should we put for if x is greater than 10? What should we put in our condition as our condition? Yeah. And let me zoom in. So if x is greater than 10, let's just define x as 25. Yeah.
You need spaces between.
You don't need to. I just like to do it. So if x is greater than 10, we'll print. Sorry, x is. I don't know how to get rid of this. Now we're going to check if x is equal to 10. So if we add another if case in our if statements, we do else if. Or is it elif?
Oh,
Okay,
also.
yeah, that's what I wasn't sure. It's elif, guys. So if x is equal to 10, we'll print x is 10. I'll get rid of this thing. And lastly, our else case, print x is less than 10. Okay, so to summarize, we define a variable x, we'll set it equal to 25, and then we'll change it to test all the cases. And if x is greater than 10, we'll print out x is greater than 10. And then we have elif, which is like an extra if case. So if x is equal to 10, then we'll print x is 10. And then otherwise, we'll print x is less than 10.
Yeah, question.
Would that be elif or it just be else if?
Else if is for a different language. So Python uses elif.
If you try else if, you're gonna get an error. I know, cause I do it all the time, cause I forget which one's which. Yeah, no.
So, two questions, actually. You have x is equal 10.
Mhm.
Why?
Why not the single equal?
Yeah.
Because then the single equal is you're basically setting 10 equal to the value of x. The double equals is basically saying is x equal to 10.
Oh, and for my second question, you have elif x equal to 10, then parentheses, but then else.
Mhm.
Is this, like, if anything else is true?
Yeah.
Is it better to do one versus the other? Could you do elif x is less than 10 again?
You can do that.
Okay.
It's just like extra writing.
Okay.
Yeah. So just another note on the syntax. When Python reads this, it'll look at the if statement. And then if that's not true, it'll go to the elif. If that's not true, it'll go to the else. But if the if is true, it'll read it, print it out, and then exit out of the if statement. That's not true if I put, for example, this were if. So if there are two ifs in a row, it'll look at both of them, even if the first one is true. So be very careful when you do that. Yeah. Well, Charlie would go take a look. Okay. Let's run this.
Why do you also, can I get a reminder on why you need the colons after the functions?
It's just the syntax.
Okay.
Just I think it's just to like say, okay, this is a function, this is an if statement. Okay, so we're gonna run this. It should be in this. Okay, so when we run the file, it says x is greater than 10, which is what we want it to do because our x is defined as 25. So let's change this and have x is equal to 10 and see what happens. And it prints x is 10. And then lastly, let's try a number less than 10. Okay, x is less than 10. Any questions before we move on to loops? Yeah. This right here, this is in VS Code.
Yeah, but you just.
Oh, how do I run the code in the terminal? So you press the terminal tab, then new terminal, and then you run Python 3 and then the file name. So in this case, it was conditionals loops demo.py. And then when you run, it should output. Any other questions? Yeah.
The running in the terminal, using it in VS Code in a terminal.
Yeah.
So it's not your actual terminal.
Oh, it's your actual.
Yeah.
Oh, it is? It's
Yeah.
just your terminal and your VS Code are connected?
Yeah. So if it's easier, you can open your other terminal. You just have to make sure you're in the folder where this file is in. Anyone still need to see the code?
So you open your terminal again, but then when you get to where you are in your terminal, do you need to do like Python, be in Python in your terminal?
You have to write, once you're in the folder where your file is,
Yeah.
you say Python 3 and then the file name.
Okay.
If you guys aren't getting an output when you see that you should be printing something, please make sure you save the file before you try to run it. Your computer can't recognize what you haven't saved. Cool. Yeah, I like that. I like that noise. Yeah, so when you are running your terminal in VS Code, you are still running your terminal, the one we've been working on for the past few weeks. It's just connected to this text editor, which is much more fancy and much nicer than Nano. You're still welcome to do Nano if you would like. We recommend VS Code because it's got all the bells and whistles.
So how do I do that? Yeah, I click on it.
Okay,
Also, if you have spaces in your file name, when you try to run them, you need to put quotation marks around them. Otherwise, the terminal recognizes it as two different words. But if you put quotations around it, it recognizes it as the full name. We recommend you don't put spaces in your file names just because for this exact reason.
all right, let's move. Yeah.
It's more of a.
Oh, just raise your hand and Charlie will come. Yeah, let's move on to loops now. Okay, so there are two types of loops. The first one is while loop. So basically what you're doing in a while loop is while some condition is true, you want to do something. And you should always make sure that the condition you're checking ends up being false at some point. Otherwise, you'll run into what's called a infinite loop, meaning the loop doesn't terminate and nothing really happens. So here's a syntax. Usually you put your condition outside of your while loop, and then you'll say, while this condition is true, we want to do something. And at some point, you're going to modify your condition. So let's look at an example. So my condition is I is equal to 10. And while I is greater than 0, we print out I. And then this statement, I minus equals 1, is the same thing as I is equal to I minus 1. So we're decrementing I for each iteration of this while loop. And this loop, basically what it does, it prints out all the numbers from 10 to 1. So if I didn't have this I minus equal 1, it's just going to print 10 forever and it won't stop. So always make sure you're modifying your case here. And then your other loop is for loop. And this is a loop you'll probably use the most because it's a lot nicer to use. But conceptually, it might be a little bit challenging to think of. So basically, for loops will iterate over some kind of object, like a list, a string, a range of numbers, etc., and do a task. So the syntax is for some like variable, and you would just name it whatever it is. In your object, you want to do something. So can anyone tell me a difference between this loop compared to the while loop? Yeah. So while loop doesn't necessarily go on forever. You also have to make that one stop.
So you have, yeah, the right idea of why they stop. And that's kind of the difference.
Anyone have any other ideas? Yeah.
Because a while loop only uses an integer while for loops can use any data type.
So while loops can also use other numbers or other data types too. It was just that one example. That's a good guess. Yeah.
While loops are kind of less specific, so to speak, than for loops. So while loops, it's just like, wow, this is true, or this general thing is true. But for loops is like, only this specific thing and this specific thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So like while loops, you basically are just doing something until something ends up not being true anymore. But this one, you already know what you're looking at, and you kind of already know when it's going to end. So also another thing is we always initialize our condition outside of the while loop, whereas in a for loop, you're initializing it inside the for loop. That's why they're easier to use, because sometimes, and then also you don't have to modify your condition. It'll modify it for you, which I'll show you in the example. Kind of hard to see right now. So for loops are nice because you don't actually have to worry about, am I changing my condition or not? And you don't have to really worry too much about infinite loops. So here's an example. This is the same thing that we did for the while loop, but in a for loop. So I said for I in range 1 to 11, I'm going to print I. So range is a very useful function in Python. It generates a list of numbers starting from the first parameter, which is your starting point, to the last parameter, which is your endpoint, but you're not including it. So range outputs a list of numbers from, in this case, 1 through 10. But you can print out any sort of numbers. You can also make a reverse list and so on. So for I in this range, so for every item in this range, I want to print out that item. So we're printing out all the numbers from 1 through 10. Are there any questions on these loops? Okay, let's write these in our terminal. Okay, so the one we did was we're printing the numbers 1 through 10. So we'll say I is equal to 10. Well, I actually did 10 through 1. That's fine. While I is greater than 10, oops, greater than 0. I want to print I. And always make sure we're modifying our condition. So I minus equals 1. Let's run this. Wait, so it starts at 10, 9, 8, 7, all the way until 1, which is what we wanted. Yeah,
What is the negative equals thing?
yeah. This is the same thing as I is equal to I minus 1. It's just a more compact notation.
How about
Oh, what was that? Sorry? Yeah. So let's actually just get rid of this and see what happens. It's printing 10 forever. So when we don't decrement our I value, it's never hitting the I is less than 0 or I is not greater than 0. So it'll always just print 10 forever because it never hits the other case. So that's why we have to put this here. Mhm. Did you save it? There next to the name, if it's not saved, it'll have like a dot. Like this dot right here. So if it's not saved, it'll do that. But if you do save, it should go away. Can you do Command S? Okay, let's do the for loop case. Okay, so for I in range 1 through 11, we're gonna print I. So we don't have to decrement I here or like increment I because the for loop will do it for us. So it'd be easier to draw this. So range creates this list. Range 1 to 11 creates this list. And when we say for I in range 1 to 11, so for I this list, we're grabbing each item in the list and printing that out. So it'll start at 1 and for each item. So then it'll move to 2, then it'll move to 3, and then so on until it hits the end of the list. And once the end of the list is reached, it stops the for loop.
Why do you have to go to 11?
Because 11 is not inclusive.
Okay, so it goes to the 10th term, because what about the whole zero, how it starts at 0? Does that not apply here?
So that's also why I put 1, because if I did until 11, it'll print, like if I did this, it'll make a list from 0 through 10. Because it does, like everything starts at 0.
Wait, but is the first term 1 or 0?
0 if it's like this. But
So 0 is term 1.
in this list, the 0th term is 1. But
Would that start at 2 then?
no, because when we say for I in this list, it's going through each item in the list. So it starts at the beginning of the list and then goes until the end. Okay, let's run this. Okay, so it prints 1, 2, 3, all the way up until 10, which is what we wanted. I'll keep these two here for 2 minutes and then we'll do a problem together. Mhm. Oh.
Is this? Oh. Because of this previously. So I started. Yeah. So this. But I can be fine on the. I mean, I guess I was. But then. Well, why is it going back? But maybe that's right in the first. This. There's this. Is this creating this? That's great. What is that? Oh, yeah. So it doesn't agree those, it just says, if I could be the spot. Yes. Right, and it was. Okay, what if I change I to be 25? Let's see. This is great. Like X is great. So then it would. But then it's still continuing to take. So like, there's a fine on our range for I that I can't go with, because I probably know that if I start them off, because it's a list, it could be that.
Well, that would be.
I'm like, telling my computer that I was the energy. Why? Where am I doing Okay.
So you did it from 0.0 to 1.
What happened?
Yeah, what would happen? Would it?
Should I be 10? Should I change that back to 10?
Yeah.
Well, let's do it because I don't want to. Oh, see, it says a float can't be assumed.
Oh, since you have to put it in. Yeah.
No, maybe it has to be. Oh, what if I should 0 to instead? Yeah, but there's no 0. This is did I? Oh, because I just then what's
So this is.
oh, so now I know. And what is
It's 0.
okay, yeah. But when I work on my component into two, and then ask for the first space.
Let's try it.
Yes. Which password?
But this still applies.
It's the one that
If I want to apply.
no, the one that we originally made. Yeah.
That's it.
This could be a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
Anyway.
First, maybe that one. Then
Okay. So, if we scroll, it goes, X is greater than 10 because X is.
that's it, you got so nice.
So. Just swap the X is greater than 10. Now just, because I.
Where did it go?
Oh. It starts at 15. It goes all the way down because printing I minus 1. And then all the way down to 0.
It's possible, but I would set it the same. one.
And then, no, but it prints in. And then down. Second. Or second.
That's-
That goes, 9.
I know, I don't know.
I'm gonna change it back so it's not so many.
Is it vision? No, this is my first time trying it. Yeah. So just make sure that. I know. Right, and, yeah, that's. Okay. I would do this. Is it like dead, or is it like powers? Okay, so it's not like your disk drive. is broken. Okay.
It's just there.
Man, that terrible.
Yeah, it's not first.
Let me see, what type of printer?
13.
Oh,
Yeah.
got one. I know, I'm like. horrible.
You-
Yeah. When you are working with data that is used, you can create, lists that are the names of indexes along, and then you can run through those indexes one at a time. And do things uniformly. Does that make sense?
Oh, is this a list? What is this? Does this create a list? Okay, so which one creates a list? This one? Or this one?
Range 1, 11 list.
Okay.
So for I in this range, it prints
This range. And this is included in all the middle. Yeah, but I tried putting one to it.
because it's very simple function. It's basically so once you get it to condition you can run it. I'm seeing it
Oh, like size of interval. Okay,
but it just likes, it doesn't like floats, range doesn't like floats.
okay, and this starts I at 10. So if I started I at 1, it would only print it would only print ones, right? If I started I at 1. For this
Started I at 1, and it would just print once.
For this is I's greater than 0. If I made I like greater than -1, it would print all the way down to 0. Right? Okay, thank you.
Definitely play around. Oh, then yeah.
What number should I say? Negative 5. Okay. You're an S.
Oh, I think it's yeah.
Give me a number. Okay.
15.
So it's only 3.5. Yeah, I think it's.
Okay.
And it's in case, and it's in less than 2.0. You have to go to this. It's basic, when you use a Python 13 and then filing, like basically you get into Python, read this file, and write it out. If you just have Python 3 and then just get into Python on your terminal, then it's just kind of like. So I'm trying to. Everyone's so you're in right. You're in, you want to check to the right. Please don't. Oh, okay, so now. So I'm just working with the, but now you can do it, remember to see it. Oh, yeah. Zero, negative one. What I do is okay, so this is
Right,
Well, this, that's.
oh, that just really got out. Maybe we'll try to see greater.
Oh, yes, actually, this is gonna be.
Okay, well, let's try. Okay, so but then it's still 10 because I didn't have it. I'm pretty sure that all of these things just. And it does go to 5. Or negative 5. Yeah. And then I'm like, this is awesome. Why should it not really be 5? For negative 5.
Yeah.
So it's right here. Yeah. So this is just the integer. Okay, so it's just numbers.
Hey guys, really quickly, after class, we're actually starting to take attendance, so please come up to me, tell me your name, and I'll check you off. There will be a different way of doing this at some point, but yeah. Cool.
Okay, so now, what we're gonna do in the last couple of minutes, we want to use a loop to find the sum of the numbers 1 through 10. Okay, so what kind of loop should we use? Raise your hand for a while loop. Nobody wants to do a while loop. One person wants to do a while loop. Raise your hand for a for loop. Okay, more people want to do a for loop, which I agree with.
Also not like while
So what should we write? Any ideas?
Does anyone have something they want to try, they haven't gotten the chance to try yet?
Yeah.
We need to define a new variable, a new letter in this.
Why would we need to?
Because your I is already something.
Oh, I see. So for this one, each time you make a for loop, this isn't defined everywhere. It's only, this I is defined only in your for loop. So it's okay if you make another for loop and use I in there.
What about for the while? You have to set I equals.
So in this case, I is defined like everywhere. So if we made another I, so over here, if I said I equal to 10 again, it would reset the value for I. So are there any thoughts for what we should do for this? Yeah. Oh, so for this problem, we want to sum the numbers 1 through 10. Sorry. So let's make our for loop. So we can do the same thing that we did for the example. We can do for I in range 1 through 11. So we want to sum the numbers 1 through 10. What should we put in the for loop?
Would you use a sum function? Or is that?
You can, but not in this context. That's like the one-liner answer. But in the loop, we can't use these functions.
I have a question. I did it, I think that's the right thing, but if when I did it in terminal, I printed out like each time I iterated this, like one in this brain. Is that it?
Mm. So you, Mhm. So it's fine that way, but it looks like you printed out the sum each time. So with our first number, or each number, we want to add it to something. So we want to do like some variable plus I each time, or plus equals I. So we can't initialize this variable inside the for loop because it'll reset the value each time we iterate. So we can set it outside. We can say like count is equal to 0. So we're initializing the value of our sum. And then we want to add to it each time. So while we go through this list of 1 through 10, we're going to add that number to our count. So the first number is 1. So we're going to add that to count. So then count is equal to 1. Then we take the second number 2. We add that to count. Count is 3. And we take 3, count is 6, 4, count is 10, so on. So when this for loop terminates, count is going to be equal to the sum of the numbers 1 through 10. So all we have to do is print out count. Let's print this or run this. And we get 55.